When federal prosecutor Kendrick Renson arrives late to challenge a tax error in Greenville's municipal court, he faces a shocking $750.00 fine from Judge Charles Whitman, a penalty others escape. Sensing deeper bias, Kendrick uncovers a pattern of racial discrimination in the court's rulings. Armed with evidence and resolve, he confronts the system, sparking a national scandal that topples Whitman and ignites statewide reforms. From a single fine to a revolution for equal justice, Kendrick's fight proves one voice can dismantle injustice. Tune in for a gripping tale of courage and change. At 8:42 a.m., Kendrick Renson pulled his sedan into the parking lot of the Greenville Municipal Courthouse in South Carolina. Dawn's glow cast elongated shadows across the pavement, and Kendrick let out a heavy breath. He despised being late. As a federal prosecutor, his career thrived on precision and timeliness. But today, fate had thrown obstacles in his path. This wasn't supposed to be a grueling day. His mission was straightforward: challenge a mistake in the property tax reassessment for the home his grandmother had bequeathed him. The city had hiked the taxes without justification, and Kendrick had spent weeks amassing evidence to prove the error. Yet that house was more than bricks and mortar to him. It was the cornerstone of his youth, where his grandmother's watchful eyes taught him the values of integrity and fairness. Clad in a deep navy suit and a crisp white shirt, Kendrick embodied the seasoned attorney he was. But his morning had been anything but calm. An urgent call about a human trafficking case had delayed him. A last-minute motion from the defense team demanded his attention. He'd scrutinized the filing, drafted a response, and raced to the courthouse, arriving just in time. As he climbed the courthouse steps, his phone buzzed. A glance revealed a text from his assistant at the U.S. Attorney's office. "Greenville's judge is notorious for cracking down on tardiness. Watch out." Kendrick exhaled, slipping the phone into his briefcase. He wasn't fazed. Facts were his strongest ally, and he was armed with ironclad proof. Still, the message nagged at him. Shrugging off the unease, he stepped inside. A hall of law but not of equity, the municipal courthouse was a far cry from the federal courts where Kendrick usually worked. Its walls were a faded taupe, the benches worn from years of use. The air carried a faint whiff of stale coffee and aging documents. Despite its weary appearance, the place pulsed with activity. People shuffled about, clutching stacks of papers, their faces taut with worry over traffic fines, petty disputes, or legal claims. Kendrick checked his watch. 8:50 IEM, 10 minutes to locate the right room. He followed signs down a narrow corridor, passing hushed conversations. Room 204, Judge Charles Whitman. The name gleamed on a polished brass plaque. Kendrick straightened his tie and entered. The courtroom was already filling up. He claimed a seat near the back and opened his folder to review his documents. As he pored over his notes, he sensed the judge's entrance, the man who held sway over fates. Judge Charles Whitman was tall, with silver hair and piercing blue eyes that commanded awe without a word. His reputation as a formidable figure shone in the way he surveyed the room with clinical precision. "All rise," the bailiff called. The room stood as one. Kendrick rose too, his stance poised and confident. Whitman took his seat, and a heavy silence settled over the courtroom like a shroud. He began summoning cases with the accuracy of a metronome, his voice icy, detached, devoid of warmth. Kendrick watched closely. A middle-aged man in a suit slipped in late, unnoticed. A young woman in casual clothes eased into a seat, ignored by the judge. Kendrick jotted a mental note but stayed focused on his own matter. At 9:15 IM, his name echoed through the room. He stood, composure intact, and approached the bench. But as Judge Whitman's gaze met his, the air shifted. The judge's face tightened, and a quiet tension rippled through the courtroom. "You're late, Mr. Renson," Judge Whitman snapped, his voice carrying a biting edge absent in his dealings with others. "Do you think this court's time is worth less than yours?" The courtroom air grew thick with unease. Kendrick raised a hand in acknowledgement. "Your Honor, I apologize for the delay. I was handling urgent federal matters." Whitman cut him off sharply. "Excuses don't absolve tardiness." His face radiated contempt. "This court operates on order and respect. If you can't uphold that, I suggest you rethink your conduct." Kendrick held his ground, his words measured with razor-sharp care. "Your Honor, I recognize the value of punctuality." But before he could elaborate, Whitman interjected. "There's a matter we must address first." Kendrick's chest tightened. "Being late undermines this court's integrity. A $750.00 fine." The verdict landed like a hammer. Whispers rippled through the room like a sudden gust. Kendrick stood firm, though his jaw clenched. "Your Honor, I can clarify." Whitman raised his gavel. "You cannot. Consider this a lesson in honoring this court." Kendrick stepped back, his mind racing. This wasn't just about being late, it was something deeper, something others in the room had likely witnessed before. He glanced at the others who'd arrived late. None had faced consequences. The disparity was glaring. He returned to his seat, flipped open his folder, not for tax documents this time, but to jot notes. His pen scratched swiftly across the page. Whitman moved to the next case, his tone flat, but Kendrick knew. This was no ordinary morning in court. It was the spark of something far larger. Settling into the back row, Kendrick's thoughts churned. The proceedings droned on, but he couldn't shake the stark inequity he'd just experienced. Whitman had disciplined him harshly, yet let other latecomers slide without a word. The pattern was unmistakable. A suited man who'd entered late continued his case uninterrupted. A young woman in casual attire scrolled on her phone, unscathed. Kendrick alone had been penalized. This wasn't a one-off, it was a system working as intended. He scribbled notes furiously. A $750.00 fine for tardiness in a municipal court was exorbitant, almost vindictive. He scanned the faces around him. Some looked shocked. Others averted their eyes, as if this were routine and they wanted no part in it. A few seemed to expect action from him, and Kendrick was determined to deliver. At last, Whitman called his name again. Kendrick rose, steadier than before. The judge fixed him with a piercing stare, as if daring him to misstep, but Kendrick wouldn't falter. "Your Honor, I have comprehensive evidence proving the error in the property tax reassessment," Kendrick said, his voice calm yet firm. He set his folder on the podium, opening it with deliberate precision. "This property has been in my family for generations. These records show a consistent valuation for 5 years. Yet the recent adjustment reflects a 30% increase with no notice or rationale." Whitman leaned back, his face a mask of utter disinterest. "I'll review it in due course, Mr. Renson," he said, his tone dismissive. "But first, let's revisit your lateness." Kendrick kept his expression impassive. "Your Honor, my delay stemmed from an urgent federal case involving human trafficking, a matter I believe we can all agree demands immediate attention." Whitman's eyes narrowed slightly, but his voice remained unchanged. "Your priorities, however noble, don't exempt you from this court's rules." It wasn't the words, it was the delivery. The blatant scorn carried a silent message. Kendrick's deeds, credentials, and identity held no weight here. His voice didn't carry the same value. Kendrick drew a deep breath, locking eyes with the judge. "Your Honor, I understand the need to follow rules." He paused, letting the words hang briefly before pressing on. "But I must ask, are these rules enforced equally for everyone in this courtroom?" The atmosphere shifted instantly. Whitman stiffened, murmurs erupted, spreading like wildfire. Kendrick had voiced the question no one had dared to ask aloud. Judge Whitman's gaze sharpened. "Are you challenging this court's integrity, Mr. Renson?" Kendrick stood unwavering. "I'm seeking clarity, Your Honor. It's vital to ensure fairness applies to everyone." Whitman slammed his gavel on the desk. "I won't tolerate attacks on this court. Your fine stands." Kendrick dipped his head slightly, his face calm yet fierce. "Thank you, Your Honor." He returned to his seat in silence, but every eye in the courtroom followed him. Some gleamed with quiet admiration, others flickered with palpable fear. The air crackled with anticipation. Kendrick pulled out his phone and began typing notes. This was far from over. A new strategy took shape. As the session ended, he lingered in the courtroom, observing the crowd. Some hurried out, others frowned, but none could erase what had just unfolded. An elderly man 2 rows ahead gave him a nod of acknowledgement. The court clerk typed nervously, her fingers faltering. In the corner, a young law student scribbled furiously in her notebook, her expression a mix of awe and resolve. Kendrick grabbed his briefcase and stepped outside. The cool air did little to ease the tension coiling around him. He checked his phone, eyeing his supervisor's contact at the U.S. Attorney's office. His thumb hovered over the call button. Not yet. This wasn't a mere misstep. It was part of a larger machine, and he was determined to dismantle it. It had become his new mission. One man against the system. Back in his car, Kendrick drew out his federal badge. The gold insignia glinted in the sunlight. He took a deep breath, resolve hardening within him. He returned to the courthouse no longer as a private citizen, but as a federal prosecutor. The courtroom was quieter now, with only a few lingering attorneys and staff. Judge Whitman was reviewing documents at his bench when Kendrick approached the podium. The clerk froze. Whitman looked up, his face darkening instantly. "Mr. Renson, this session is over. If you have further business, schedule an appointment." Kendrick held his gaze steady. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I believe a formal introduction is in order." He produced his badge, raising it just enough for all to see. "I am Kendrick Renson, Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of South Carolina." Whitman went rigid. The remaining staff held their breath. "For over a decade, I've served the Department of Justice, specializing in corruption and civil rights violations." The color drained from Whitman's face. Kendrick took a step forward. "What I witnessed here today will not go unaddressed." Silence gripped the room. Whitman tried to regain control, but Kendrick had seized the moment. This wasn't the end, it was the dawn of an unjust system's unraveling. The courtroom had transformed into a silent battlefield. Kendrick stood tall, his federal badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Whitman stared at him, his face as unyielding as stone. "Mr. Renson, if you believe there was a procedural issue, file a formal complaint," he said, his voice strained but measured. Kendrick didn't flinch. "I've already begun documenting this morning's events, Your Honor." He held up his notebook, just enough for others to notice. "Not only regarding my treatment, but also how other cases were handled today, especially the disparities in how defendants were treated based on their race." A deathly hush fell over the courtroom. Whitman leaned back, his hands gripping the arms of his chair tightly. "Are you accusing this court of bias, Mr. Renson?" Kendrick remained composed. "I'm reporting what I observed, and as a federal prosecutor, I'm duty-bound to report any patterns of discrimination or prejudice in our courts." The clerk glanced nervously at the judge, her fingers trembling over her keyboard. The bailiff, previously still, looked away. In the back row, the law student wrote with frantic intensity, her face alight with astonishment. Whitman swallowed hard. The court had never faced such a direct challenge. "This court takes allegations of misconduct very seriously," Whitman said, his voice taut. "If you believe your sanction was in error, follow the proper channels." Kendrick closed his notebook with deliberate calm. "I will, Your Honor." He tucked away his badge and gathered his briefcase. Whitman watched him leave, but for the first time, his eyes held no trace of scorn or superiority. There was only fear. A case that transcended a mere fine. As Kendrick stepped out of the Greenville courthouse, the gravity of the moment pressed heavily on him. His phone buzzed with a message from Julia Harper, his supervisor at the U.S. Attorney's office. "Kendrick, I reviewed your report. If your account holds, this could expose systemic bias. Brace yourself." He knew this was only the beginning. Back at his office, Kendrick dove into building his case, working late into the night. He sifted through municipal court records, hunting for patterns in Judge Whitman's fines, rulings, and sentences. The data was staggering. Black defendants faced penalties 300% steeper than white defendants for identical violations. White latecomers were overlooked, while black ones were harshly disciplined. White defendants often received leniency or warnings. These weren't random discrepancies. They were deliberate, woven into the system's fabric. Kendrick reached out to colleagues, defense attorneys, and civil rights advocates. Stories poured in. A young black lawyer recounted how Whitman routinely cut off black defendants, denying them a chance to speak. An African-American woman shared how she'd been slapped with an excessive fine for a minor zoning issue, while a white man with the same infraction got a mere caution. The scandal erupted. The Judicial Review Board launched a formal probe into Judge Whitman. Auditors and investigators stormed the courthouse, combing through years of records. The court clerk, Mrs. Thompson, emerged as a pivotal figure. From a hidden drawer, she produced a notebook filled with years of notes on Whitman's unjust rulings. "I always knew something was wrong," she murmured. "I feared losing my job, but I can't stay silent anymore." Even the bailiff, James Wilson, broke his long-held silence. "I've been here 15 years, he said. "I've seen the unequal treatment firsthand. I knew it was wrong, but I never thought change was possible." The story detonated across the media. Federal prosecutor uncovers bias in South Carolina courts. Discrimination on trial. Kendrick Renson's fight. On social media, equal justice soared to national trending status. Protests flared outside the courthouse. The pressure mounted relentlessly. Whitman faced multiple hearings, denying every accusation, but the evidence was undeniable. His stronghold of authority began to crumble. A week later, Julia called again. "The final report is done," she said. "The proof is overwhelming. Whitman exhibited systemic bias against minority defendants." His disciplinary file was riddled with unaddressed complaints. Immediate removal was advised. The next day, Judge Whitman resigned. For Kendrick, this wasn't a personal triumph. It was the dawn of genuine reform. The state rolled out sweeping changes to municipal courts, mandatory racial bias training for judges and staff, independent oversight of fines and sentences, and legal aid programs for low-income defendants. The courthouse where it all began was transformed. Its walls were repainted, and a new sign graced the entrance. "Justice is a right, not a privilege." A judicial ethics committee was established, partly due to Kendrick's efforts, a legacy far greater than a fine. Months later, Kendrick was invited to address a national conference on fairness and equity in the judiciary. After his speech, a young law student approached him, eyes bright with admiration. "Thank you for what you did, Mr. Renson. I've always dreamed of being a lawyer, but sometimes I wonder if I can truly make a difference." Kendrick offered a warm smile. "Change doesn't begin with grand actions. It starts with speaking out when others stay silent." Kendrick's story rippled beyond Greenville. Prosecutors across the country began scrutinizing their own courtrooms. More judges faced investigations. Communities rose up, demanding reform. Young attorneys found inspiration in his battle. In his office, Kendrick framed a single item: the $750.00 fine. Not as a badge of victory, but as a reminder that even the smallest moments can ignite sweeping revolutions. The journey of Kendrick Renson underscores a fundamental truth. Justice is only authentic when it is applied equally to all. What began as a minor penalty for tardiness unveiled a deeper systemic flaw, a quiet bias that harmed countless lives, unchallenged until Kendrick confronted it head-on. He understood that truth's power lies in the courage to expose it. Everyone who has ever felt the sting of injustice, judged not for their deeds, but for their appearance, knows the weight of Kendrick's struggle. Kendrick Renson's battle reveals a profound truth. Justice demands courage to challenge inequity, no matter how entrenched. His stand against systemic bias teaches us that silence in the face of unfairness perpetuates harm, but one determined voice can spark monumental change. In our lives, this means confronting prejudice, whether in workplaces, schools, or communities, and advocating for equal treatment for all. Like Kendrick, we must act, even when the odds seem daunting, trusting that small steps can reshape systems. By questioning authority and amplifying marginalized voices, we build a fairer world. This story inspires us to be vigilant, to speak truth to power, and to never underestimate our impact. Thank you for joining this journey of justice. Please like, share, and subscribe for more stories of transformation. Comment below. Have you faced or fought injustice? What lessons did it teach you? Share your experiences. We'd love to hear them.